had coffee today.
I had to hit the tour button, man.
It's his show, bro. It's his show.
Well, we are going to go ahead and kick this one off today. How we doing, fellas?
Wonderful, wonderful.
Peace.
Awesome. Well, Robert, yeah, go ahead and let everybody know who you are, and we'll go through, introduce everybody, and kick this one off.
All right. Brother Robert Ward with the San Diego Black Panther Party. I originally got started in the Panther Party. I'm just going to give a briefing on that. Back in 1994 in Dallas, Texas, under the leadership of Aaron Michaels through the new Black Panther Party, and in the very beginnings of its formation. From there, I established a chapter of the new Black Panther Party in Denver, Colorado, and then also lived there for a year, then moved to Atlanta and worked with the chapter in Atlanta for about three years before moving on to Florida. And that's when me and Brother E linked up for the second time and worked on establishing a chapter in Orlando, Florida. And then from there, I moved to California, and that's when I ran across Henry Lee in 2014. And at that point in time, I joined the Black Panther Party here in San Diego. When I did live in Dallas, Texas, at one point I became the local chairman of the Dallas chapter of the new Black Panther Party.
Awesome. Oh, and before we move on to somebody else, by chance, Robert, do you have any like headphones or anything you can put in? Like your sound is coming through a little bit muffled. But I figured you could look for those while we're introducing everybody else.
All right, let me do that.
All right, who wants to go next?
Leave career.
Okay, so yeah, that's the name on my birth certificate. I typically go by Brother Eric or Brother E. Grew up as fairly nerdy. My father's Black, my mother's white, and I a lot of times will mess with my moms and tell her, you know, you're the reason I became a Black Panther. Growing up, I was always involved in somebody's, she was dragging me to somebody's voter registration or a protest against the government actions in South America or a nuclear protest rally. So, you know, Pac has a line where he says, essentially, some of y'all were sworn into it, but I was born into it. I really had no choice. This is the way I came up. I remember FBI agents coming to our house when I was a kid. So this has just been a way of life for me. I've got in elementary school, I got sent to the principal a number of times, you know, in first, second, third grade for refusing to say the Pledge of Allegiance. So that's just it was just kind of a natural eventuality. As I grew up, got out into community on my own, started meeting people. The party was, it wasn't my first endeavor, but, you know, doing the college thing, being an activist and getting things changed on campus and whatnot, and kind of wetting my own feet into the being baptized into some type of formal struggle type of community. And then just growing from there, eventually met Brother War out in Fort Worth, Texas. We developed a relationship over the years. He drafted me into the party, made me be the MOI, went kicking and screaming of the new Black Panther Party back in, I guess it was like 97, 98, somewhere around Jasper, Texas, and everything that went on down there in that time. As he said, eventually both of us ended up here in Florida, did some work developing a chapter in Orlando, continued as he moved out to the West Coast, continued to work with some folks in the area, in the community. Fast forward to now, working with the Panther 48, having moved, especially in these days and age, this day and age with the whole COVID thing, being out in the community physically, feet on the ground is kind of I don't know, you need to do it, but you know, masks and all of that. So yeah, at this point, working with the Panther 48, still touching bases and dealing with different podcasts and folks online networking to develop a storehouse of information and a networking, basically a Panther network, so to speak, so that we don't have to rely on external sources for the information about us. So yeah, I'm kind of the book nerdy kind of guy that just happens to like the party thing, you know. So, you know, which is, if you know the history of the original party, you know, Huey and them were fairly nerdy too. Huey had a, you know, it was an egghead, you know, used a lot of big words. Angela Davis, huge words. So it kind of goes along with it. But yeah, my background is a little bit more of a square than the other two cats that are on here.
Gotcha.
And MOI is Minister of Information.
My bad. Yeah, Minister of Information. Yeah.
I was gonna wait until we got to the end of that to ask anyway, so we're good. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you, Eric. Next on to Psyche.
All right. He done took MOI, the acronym MOI, and that become synonymous with his name now.
Yeah. Everywhere I go.
My birth name is Terry Brown. I go by the name Psyche. I've been going by Psyche forever. The tie that binds between all three of us is actually Brother Robert Williams. And I first met this brother. When I met him, I wasn't conscious at all. I was in the streets, but I was doing music, rap, and I belonged to a rap group that his cousin was in. And his cousin, you know, he would kick knowledge with us, share knowledge with us, and we'd build on ideas. And so by the time I met Brother War, I was kind of, I'm not gonna say seasoned because I wasn't even seasoned yet, but I kind of had an understanding of what I was ready to hear. And Brother War back then, he used to do production. He used to make tracks. So we would buy tracks, rent studio time, things like that from the brother. And he'd always drop a jewel here and there and share information. Anyway, as I said, based on my background, I spent a lot of time being incarcerated, being in the streets. So I went to jail in 1994, and I beat the charge and came home in 1995. But while I was incarcerated, not to get into the long story of it, while I was incarcerated, a lot of the things that War talked about while we was in the studio, that his cousin Short Change talked about while we was in the studio, a lot of those things kind of incubated. So when I came home, I reached back out to War and essentially told him that I was ready for the things that he was talking about before I went to jail. And we started building, and the process started there. Then I decided to move to Fort Worth. And he came to me and told me, you know, I met these two funny looking guys out in Fort Worth. One of them called himself Third. He looked like Kool Moe D and Chuck D mixed together. And another one called himself Brother E. He kind of looked like the little funny looking guy, green guy from the cartoon. What is his name? Gumby.
Really?
I don't know where that came from.
He told me that I need to sit on these guys, make sure they're not informants, and if anything get out of hand, we can push a button on these guys. So
I never knew that. Wait a minute.
I'm joking.
Oh, okay.
Like, this changes our relationship.
You know what I'm saying?
No, I'm joking. If that was the truth, I would sit here and swear with my right hand up that I was joking. But he introduced me to these brothers, and I, you know, I never asked them why, but I felt it was basically to continue my own growth. Because when I met them, then they started introducing me to more historical type of ideas, and I continued my building with them. And then around the same time that Brother War inducted Brother Ian to the party, he inducted me into the party. He inducted me as the chief of staff for the new Black Panther Party under Aaron Michaels, which would eventually become the chairman of. Throughout the process of us building the lessons, the structure, and things of that nature, I would once again go to jail in 2001, and I would remain there until 2018. So I was incarcerated from 2001 to 2018, and while in prison, I found that they had Panthers in prison. They had a group called the Panther Vanguard, but the group, essentially, from what I heard and what they taught me while I was in prison, was that 3 guys that was actually active somewhere in the late 70s, early 80s, organized this Panther Vanguard, and they was the only ones that actually knew why it was organized. So by the time I got to prison, all the guys that were claiming they were Panthers by that time was essentially just a hyped up game when I reached these guys. And so I started organizing, teaching. They didn't even know the 10-point platform. So I started organizing, teaching, and structuring those guys in prison. And that's essentially how I spent the majority of my time in prison, building with the younger brothers in prison and helping them have an understanding of what revolution was.
Okay.
That's essentially my background.
Thank you all for sharing. And yeah, it's unique how people find each other, you know, like how people like end up crossing each other's paths and working together and finding, you know, common ground. But yeah, it's interesting hearing your guys' stories on how you kind of met. I would love to get into the history of the Black Panther Party, why it got started, and yeah, like I was saying before, we're gonna get into like a timeline of like where it is today, because you know one of the things that's out there is a lot of misinformation about the Black Panther Party, and I think it's good to get actual members to set the record straight.
All right, we'll bounce around on the history because a lot of people reference the Black Panther Party to start with Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, but in actuality, it was initially started in Lowe's County, Alabama, the symbol of the panther, and a lot of us even refer back to it even before that, when we talk about the mentality of the Black Panther, as well as even in Africa, there was you know, Black Panther tribes. So, and only people know about that is when they think about the comic book, which obviously was based on some of the information that goes that far back. But in essence, starting with Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton, in Merritt College, they came together under the idea of addressing the fact that Black Student Union or Black history wasn't being taught properly within their educational school system. Now, mind you, again, the symbol itself was already being used to help guide people in the community as to who was the correct politicians to vote for, because we was dealing with a situation where a lot of the Black working class was not actually educated and, you know, shunned on learning the political system. And because we were cast out and pushed away from learning political system, a lot of the Black communities didn't have the proper training or techniques and know-how in order to make sure certain politicians that would work on the best interest of the Black community, or a better interest, should I say, the Black community, because we're dealing with segregation, that would help the community or work better toward the community, as well as keep Klan members who at that point in time was entrenching the politics and the political system out of office. So the symbol of the Black Panther was used so that they knew who to vote for, because a lot of the people couldn't even read at that point in time. In fact, if you go back and look at a lot of the aspects of voting early on in the 1900s, they used money and certain forms of education as ways to rule out who could and couldn't vote. So from that standpoint, the symbol was already being used, and Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale took from the legacy of that symbol and formed the Black Panther Party in Oakland, California, to address again the fact that our people and our legacy as Africans wasn't being taught throughout the school system and basically being brushed over. But as they developed the party, they moved on and they dealt with the 10-point platform, and they basically came to a point of recognizing the importance of Black people establishing political power and empowering the community. And one of the first cases they dealt with at that point had to do with police brutality. So from that standpoint, the Black Panther Party, knowing, because Huey P. Newton was a law student, and so knowing that we had the right, according to the Constitution, we had the right to bear arms, they exercised the right to bear arms in confronting the racist cops in the community, not from the stance of basically a show of defiance, but from just saying that if I have a weapon and you have a weapon, because we're both humans and we both have the right, it served as an equalizer. Once it served as an equalizer, now that we both got guns, now we can talk to each other like human beings. So the whole point of initially addressing weapons had to do with getting the oppressor to recognize, look, we equals. You're not going to be able to oppress me. You're not going to be able to basically create fear in me. But we're going to have to come together from power, respect, and power, and talk this out and be able to deal with, let us deal with our community, and let us deal with protecting our community, and not continue to, to abuse, use your powers of abuse and bring down my community. And from that standpoint, because that show of force was so unusual to the mass majority of the people, it ended up making headway. But keep in mind, there was always armed resistance and armed forces that went on. In fact, there was an organization, Revolutionary Action Movement, and a brother named Robert F. Williams, who actually was dealing with guns prior to that, and you even had it going on in the Christian church, to where they would arm themselves and defend against oppression and brutality. And we're talking in the 40s and 50s. So all throughout time, that was the case. So Huey P. Newton, Bobby Seale borrowed from certain things that they recognized historically that worked, and brought it together and established their brand of the Black Panther Party. Y'all, anyone want to add to that real quick? And we can just kind of keep it going from that stance.
Yeah.
No, I'm good. Keep going.
Okay. Sound like you pretty much got it.
I'm sitting here like, class is in session.
All right. And so from that, moving forward, the Black Panther Party also, and this is where you can jump in, also adopted and moved with the legacy, the political legacy of Malcolm X. And from that standpoint, they basically wanted to build on the philosophy that, African people must stand up, and we must defend ourselves by any means necessary. But what that actually meant, beyond just the weapons, is that it was a drive for African people to recognize our greatness. It was a drive for us to demand that we are treated equal. And what you had at that point in time was a sense of fear that was being projected in the community, a sense of inferiority that was obviously being continued in terms of attempting to make Black people or African people feel like they are getting everything that they deserve, and portraying the whole idea of second-class citizens. So when the Black Panther Party, donned the beret, put on the, carry the weapons, and, walk through the street, helping the community, and walk through the street, making sure police wouldn't go in and just continue to just oppress people because of whatever personal issues they were dealing with as they, put the uniform on and got out to work. It created a sense of pride back into the Black community. And that was the whole point, is that we have the right. We have the right to do what we're doing in the community. We have the right to have businesses. We have the right to have good education. We have the right to decide the destiny of our communities. And so from that standpoint, it created a unification within the Black community, that the people must stand up and demand equality, demand that we are able to build and just live as people and establish things. So that sense of pride ushered in what was referred to as Black Power. And the Black Power, what it meant, it just simply meant that Black people were able to establish themselves, do things, and prosper according to how, as human beings, prosper and have a good way of life. And if we want to be hardworking people and we want to contribute to society, we have the right to be recognized for that contribution to society, as well as get America to establish and stop suppressing the history of Africans and the greatness of that Africans have portrayed, across the world, through centuries, as instead of just only insinuating the slave trade and us being second class. So the Black Panther Party, through Black Power, created that sense of pride. That wave hit all across the United States. And what ended up putting the Black Panther Party on the map is when they basically marched to the Capitol, not marched to the Capitol, but went to the Capitol to address the situation that applies to the gun legislation. So at the time, they were in the process of trying to change gun legislation as a result of what was going on in California. So from that standpoint, go ahead, jump in, E.
I was just going to say, interesting side note, that incident and the law changes that Reagan and them threw out there was the one time in recorded history of the NRA's recorded history that they actually supported a gun ban law, gun ban legislation. You know, that was the time that they rallied around. Yeah, maybe nobody should have guns. So that was kind of an interesting side note to that whole period. And though that type of incident put the party on the map insofar as the media and the public's perception and all, as far as the government was concerned, I always like to point this out because so much hype is given to that aspect. And I love the hype. I'm not gonna lie. You know, I definitely like the look and the feel, no doubt. But what actually made them effective and made them a threat, per the words of J. Edgar Hoover, was the Feed the Children program. It was the programs that the free shoe program, the ambulances that the party, there was no real ambulance service in our communities, not reliable anyway. So we came up with our own ambulances. You know, feeding the community, the tutorials, the sickle cell anemia programs that you see around today, because sickle cell is something that affects African people and not so much others. That testing came from us. The Black Panthers actually came up with the testing in our community. It didn't exist prior to that. So we came up with that. Why? Because we had Black doctors, Black attorneys, Black teachers that were involved in the party as well. It wasn't just street cats, which is a lot of the image. It's just these just a bunch of thugs in the street. No, these were actual cats with degrees who were involved in the community as well. So programs like that, the free lunch programs that you see in the public schools, that came from us. The government co-opted it because they could do it cheaper. They could, you know, force it, enforce it, whatever, streamline it and all of that. And so they took it over. But those programs brought the community together, which is what made them and the community a threat to the power structure, was not a gun, because they've got way more guns. It's the idea of unity around self-determination, actually being able to take our destiny in our own hands to do for self, as opposed to leaning on the government and keeping us in basically a slave position where we were depending on them to take care of the very things they complain about today. Back then, before then, and since then, the government has actively worked to get rid of. So the idea is, if then and even now, is that if, okay, we don't have a problem with the idea that there are a lot of people that don't want Black folk to be suckling at the teat of this government, to be on welfare, to, you know, food stamps. That's fine. Then get out of the way and let us do for self. If y'all are not going to do it, like Malcolm has talked about, if the government's unwilling or unable to protect and by extension to provide for our community, then move around and let us do it for ourselves and stop actively working to destroy those programs, because the party wasn't the first time that these types of programs existed in this country. You know, we've been forced, if by nothing other than circumstance, to work together. You know, when you have a bunch of people that don't have anything, you put them in the same place, they're either going to kill each other or work together. And we did the latter. We worked together in most instances to develop something in our own communities. And eventually, whether it was Black Wall Street, was Rosewood, was in whatever, and there were several more examples of Black communities owning and prospering in this country. But every single time, if you go back, Black Wall Street is the most popular or the most talked about. If you've ever heard the Gap Band, they were actually named after the you know, you dropped a bomb on me, baby, that song. That group, actually, the letters from that group are actually from the streets that ran through Black Wall Street there in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So it's a reference back. That was something that we knew about in our community. We had this oral tradition as African people, and it's something that we were aware of. But, you know, Black Wall Street had, you know, again, we were doing for self. black attorneys, teachers, stores, all of that. And the usual, you know, thing that the go-to accusation is some black dude did something to some white chick, and oh my God, here we go, let's bomb the place. And they did. They literally, this white mob literally flew crop duster planes over Black Wall Street and dropped dynamite on the city. And there were several, I mean, there are YouTube videos galore about, you know, talking to even some of the folks that survived. But the story is essentially the same every single time, whether it's Black Wall Street or it was the Black Panther Party. When we become effective at dealing with our own issues and we begin building and becoming prosperous, the exact same, whether it's codified in COINTELPRO or if it's just a bunch of redneck wanna-be mob clan type cats coming in and destroying it, it happens every single time. So that just wanted to kind of pique my need to throw that in there. Those are the things that J. Edgar Hoover and the government were actually fearful of, was this coming together, because the idea is to have everybody apart. So coming together is the threat, So, sorry, bro, go ahead.
Insanity to me.
Yeah, and all of this, and this is not, and again, let me say, when we talk, this is, well, not so much war, I don't really see him get wired up, but I know Psyche and myself, when we start talking about it, we become real impassioned about it. So a lot of times it may come off as these are just some cats that are pissed and got something to say, just want to talk and rah, 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 rah. But the examples and the ideas that we have, the understandings that we've come to are built on historical information that is readily found in a number of books, a number of websites, Black websites, white websites, you know, Wikipedia, encyclopedia. Most of it is just a matter of perspective, which is what has changed seemingly a lot here lately. We've been telling folks for years, you know, I saw an interview with Ice Cube a couple of days ago, talking to him about, you know, I don't know about language on here, but the F the police, the whole, okay, so
Language of
police. You know, the whole NWA thing and how now it's kind of come to pass. And he's like, yeah, we've been saying this for years. This is what we were saying back then. But now people are starting to gain a different perspective, you know, if for no other reason, because people are forced to sit at home and watch YouTube videos. And now they're saying, oh, this is really what's been happening. Like, they weren't just talking. Like, no, this is what's been happening. So the information is out there. I can take information about our history written by someone who has an agenda to downplay the African influence or African accomplishments in this world. I can take their information and build a class off of it. It's a matter of the perspective. How are you looking at that information? You know, so you can either build them up with the I don't know, the racist perspective. You can build somebody up, build somebody down, build somebody up, somebody else up, and break them down. Either way. So that's kind of our emphasis, is developing a perspective, but we always base that on some type of historical evidence, so that it's not just us talking, you know, and we'll throw that back and forth at each other as well. When we're just having regular conversations about family, we'll pull up something, you know, Malcolm said such and such, this is, you know, and historically, this is how we've always done it, da-da-da-da-da-da, and check each other on that. So we're always calling each other back to our perspective and our information, so that we can keep ourselves in check and on point. I think that's been a thread and nugget that's developed well between the three of us, is the ability to do that. But yeah, I didn't mean to get off track with your history there, bro. My bad. Go ahead.
Well, one thing I do want to add to what he's saying is, in going into the idea of the threat, the Black Panther Party had well over 50 different programs throughout the United States that they were doing to bring and unify the community, empower the community. So the thing is the government saw that and basically started adopting and co-opting these programs. And one of the effects of that is obviously to try to nullify the people from depending on each other. So the deal is the unity that was being established in the community, like he said, was a result of being, you know, to some degree having to deal with it, because we were dealing with elements of segregation and oppression and all that, and just racism all at the same time, systemic racism. But at the same time, in order to try to nullify that as the government would take on these resources and take on these programs and adopt the programs, then that would extract that power from the community, unifying around self-preservation, unity, in the community unifying around self-determination. So once it became a government operation, then slowly but surely over time, and now we're getting into the COINTELPRO aspect, but so slowly and surely over time, the people don't own up or feel like it is an obligation as a community to instill these programs and to operate and make sure that we sustain ourselves, but become dependent on the government to do so. So as you get used to that theory and get used to that concept, what it does is it actually backdoors the whole concept of being domesticated all over again. So then the people fall asleep in terms of their actual power. And now you go back to the idea, whereas what I refer to as a trifactor, whereas we started off with embracing individual, community, and family, all three at the same time. Once you take the community out of it, now everybody's only concerned about their individual wealth and their family legacy. But then you took out the community element, which is what ties everything back together, which is where we get that closed fist, raising it up, showing all power to the people. So you eliminate that thread from the conscious mind of the community. And once that thread is eliminated from the conscious mind of the community, and of course you suppress history, then what happens at that point is the whole common unity, especially within the Black community, where you had the good and the bad coexisting, working together. Now you remove the good and you open up the floodgates through a integration, so to speak, which we refer to really as a simulation, because as Black people in our communities, we had a community control. But as the good elements or the positive and productive elements of the Black community starts moving out of community, because certain other things are wanting to be around, doctors wanting to be around doctors, attorneys wanting to live around attorneys. And basically you started dealing with the class struggle as well as the Black struggle, and you created a separation. Now that you allowed the separation to go inside, and this is through social engineering. From that standpoint, now the Black community is only made up of pimps, pushers, and prostitutes in terms of the ones that are thriving economically, but are doing so through a negative influence. So from that standpoint, the community goes back to sleep. So through the
go back to the history. We got and that's my fault. But he wants to hear the history. So keep pulling history.
Oh, that was still good though. Like we're probably gonna go off on like a few tangents throughout this, which is completely fine.
Okay. So in dealing with that historical significance, and like we talked about, the where they were changed, the laws were changing as a result of the Black Panther Party showing a stance of self-defense, and the Black Panther Party at that point focused more of their programs on the social organizing and development of the community, which again, when we talk about the FBI's involvement and J. Edgar Hoover or Gay Edgar Hoover at that point, basically thinking that, well, now that you disarmed the Panthers, that you was going to disarm the strength, which it was the actual, it actually just made the Panther Party more stronger, because at that point, they focused in on what we can do to build up the community. And as a result of that, the community itself started embracing the Panther Party. So now our numbers and now our ability for everyone to stand together serve the same position as the weapons used to stand, because you're not going to get some cops just start shooting and gunning down a whole community when they can no longer go in the back alleys and beat somebody up, which is what was happening, and a few people try to move on and go about their way. Now all of a sudden people already was in the mindset of, anytime the police come out, we're going to surround them, or we're going to watch, and we're going to make sure that we have witnesses, and that, hey, we get involved, and you're not going to just oppress our people. So at that point in time, the people had a mentality of standing up. So the Black Panther Party was always about show and lead by example. And that in itself is what created that essence of threat, because what we were projecting to do was show the community how we must empower ourselves, and not just simply feed the community, but actually show the community what to do. And then the community adopts those methods And we, from that standpoint, can go from community to community and continue to empower ourselves. So the Black Panther Party was significant in that stance, and that's what created the threat, is that we were building rebuilding the concept of keeping the community empowered, in representing that from a political legacy. And even going back to that real quick, I do want to make sure the point is known that the Laos County Freedom Organization is what adopted and started using the Panther symbol. And at the time, it was actually Stokely Carmichael that was a part of that organization prior to being a Panther that brought that in on the West Coast. So moving forward, the Black Panther Party, as they began to start making headway across the United States and being significant in terms of empowering the people. And this is not just Black people, keep in mind, this was just oppressed people in general, especially in the Western sector, is we started building with everybody that was dealing with oppression. And we started basically saying, hey, as a people, we must depend upon each other to establish goodwill and not expect a government to provide, but we have to provide for ourselves, and don't let the government become so big and so powerful that we lose our identity as a people. And from that standpoint, attacks started being launched on the Black Panther Party because they became what was referred to as the greatest threat to the internal security of the United States. Now, what that really meant had more so to do with the fact that we were not allowing ourselves to continue to be oppressed. We were standing up to racism. We were standing up to wrongdoing, and working toward addressing the systemic racism that was happening in the United States, which is kind of ironic because we're kind of moving back toward that same direction now. But all we're dealing with is history repeating itself in terms of people waking up. So keep that in mind. It's the people itself. It's not just the Black people, but it's all people waking up to the fact that, hey, something is wrong and we need to address this. So as the Black Panther Party became that threat, because they became that voice of unity and that voice of consciousness and waking up, then the certain programs got implemented to target and assassinate by any means necessary the works of the Black Panther Party. So COINTELPRO at that point would use, would wiretap. They would, create provocateurs. They would implant. They would do anything and everything that they could to create whatever levels of, I would think assassination or whatever, or in any level they could to destroy the movement. So with that being said, certain core leadership were targeted either through assassination, or they use membership themselves, again, through bugging the membership. If there was vices that people had against each other, they would use that and on each other and create false leaflets and false information and make it appear as though member will be attacking member. They would create snitch jackets on people and say, hey, such and such is an informant, such and such is this, with no validation of proof. And some members actually ended up losing their lives as a result of being, it put out there that they were informers when they weren't. And so from that standpoint, you created this seed of distrust within the ranks of the organization. So a lot of the CIA tactics that they used to topple governments basically became a domestic operation against the Black Panther Party. And so that's what we have to know. And mind you, the Black Panther Party at this time recognizes that we're at war and we're under attack. But because at that point in time, these tactics were not just readily readily accessible to the people, because this is before the whole Watergate thing and the exposure. The people, a lot of this just seemed to be conspiracy, and it was hard to connect the dots, and so many people thought it was being exaggerated. And from that standpoint, it was easy to target the Panther Party and separate them from the community through these type of attacks, because their pockets are deep, the budget is what it is, and these methods that they use are used all across the world to, again, topple government. So what chance do the Black Panther Party have when you have these secret operations being launched against them to be able to defend themselves and keep that model going? So from that standpoint, the Black Panther Party, slowly, the offices slowly begin to close as they begin to be attacked by the police department, attacked by the justice system. You know, you even had headquarters being shot up. You had members that were being put in jail for, you know, falsely accused of things and false records. You had, you know, you had plenty of examples of our people basically going to jail for a little bit of nothing and serving life sentences. So a lot of the core leadership of the Black Panther Party became political prisoners at that point in time. And from that standpoint, go ahead.
Before you continue,
Knew he was gonna jump on that. Knew he was gonna jump in on that.
Now I want to go back a little bit. I was trying to wait for y'all to slow down, but before you continue with how the party was kind of destroyed, I'm gonna kind of go back a little bit and deal with how the party was kind of built, some of its roots. The Black Panther Party, in the truest understanding, was a grassroots organization. When Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale came together and decided to organize the Black Panther Party, they started in the grassroots of the community. They started in the hoods, in the neighborhoods. And plug your ears, because I'm finna quote Huey a lot right here. He always he like to criticize me for quoting Huey, but Bobby Seale, Fred Hampton, all of them say they used to call it the genius of Huey P. Newton. And what they used to refer to was the fact that Huey basically had a plan. See, Huey was a good idealist, and he the one that developed most of the ideology that the Black Panther Party started from originally. Bobby Seale was the speaker. Bobby Seale was the Malcolm X. Huey couldn't really speak. He used to stutter and all that when he tried to give a public speech. But Bobby Seale was the one that was good at articulating those ideas to the masses. And then later, Eldridge Cleaver became that voice. But Huey was the one behind the scenes that basically put forth the brain power behind that engine. So a couple of things that Huey had an idea of was that the Black Panther Party was never meant to be an occupying army across the globe in all the Black communities. The Black Panther Party was only meant to be the vanguard and basically to guide the people toward their own liberation. He believed that the cadres, the small cadres, was already in the neighborhoods, and all they needed to be was politicized and directed. So one of Huey's ideals was to politicize the street gangs that already existed in the neighborhoods. He did it in the Mexican neighborhoods, it was the Brown Berets. In the Puerto Rican neighborhoods, it was the, what was their names? I forget their names. I can't remember the name of the Puerto Rican gang. In the Chinese neighborhood, it was the Red Berets. In the white neighborhood, it was the Patriot Party. So he did this with all these different groups. In the Black neighborhood, back then, some of the major street gangs in California was the Slauson Street Gang. Wasn't no Crips or Bloods at the time. And he heard about the leader of the Slauson Street Gang, whose name was Bunchy Carter. And he heard that Bunchy Carter, you know, he was highly respected in LA. And Huey, one of the things that Huey would do, and one of the reasons why cats on the streets respected Huey so much, is that brother, he was right. Huey was an egghead, but he also was a street guy.
Yep.
He was the type of guy that knew how to move in the streets and would actually get in the streets, drink a beer with you, fight with you, and all that. And he'd be on the college campus studying law. He was the mixture of that. So he heard a bunch of Carter, and he drove out. He got in his little VW Bug, and he drove out to LA from Oakland. And hey, where's Bunchy Carter? They called Bunchy Carter, had so much respect. In LA, they called him the mayor of the ghetto. That's what they called him. And he said, hey, where's this mayor at? And they showed him Bunchy Carter, and he walked up to Bunchy Carter. He said, man, I heard you good with your hands. Let me see what you got. And him and Bunchy Carter had a nice little boxing match in the streets. And after that, they sat down, popped up in a bureau, and he had told Bunchy Carter, man, with the poor that you have in the streets, if you turned your street gang into the LA chapter of the Black Panther Party, the Black Panther Party will grow exponentially overnight.
Wow.
And Bunchy Carter, he was for this. He was all for it. So he came under a lot of Huey's tutelage, and he turned the entire Slauson Street Gang into the LA chapter of the Black Panther Party. And this same influence spread all over the country. In Chicago, Fred Hampton did the same thing. Now the difference in Chicago is that the Gangster Disciples and the vice lords already existed. Fred Hampton's job was to go into the gangster disciples and the vice lords and start teaching them and politicizing them. That's why those gangs are so politicized, much more than any other basic street gang, black street gangs around the country. He would go in and teach and That was what made Fred Hampton so dangerous at 21, that he politicized them. Now, what they did get from the Panthers back then, while they already existed, what they did was start calling themselves nations based off the Panthers' influence. Because the Panther Party would tell them that we are the People's Army, we are the vanguard. And Jeff Ford, who was the founder of the People's Nation, which was what the vice lords and all those groups came under, he said, okay, if they are the People's Army, then every army belongs to a nation, so we'll be the People's Nation. And so he started the People's Nation. And under that influence, David Barksdale started the Folks Nation, which was what the Gangster Disciples and all them came under. So all of this was direct Panther influence, to the point that some Gangster Disciples and some vice lords think that the Panther Party started their groups, and they didn't. They already existed. They just influenced them. And with the Crips and Bloods in California, the Panther Party didn't start those groups. They had an indirect influence, and I'm gonna kind of explain how. Keep in mind that, like I said, there was no Crips and there was no Bloods. The biggest street gang in LA was the Slauson Street Gang, which became the LA chapter of the Black Panther Party. But when Bunchy Carter was murdered, when Bunchy Carter was killed, I think it was in '66, when Bunchy Carter was killed on the California college campus, he was murdered. The control that they had over all the members of that LA Black Panther Party, which was the members of the Slauson Street Gang, was lost. Yeah. So he would recognize that he did what was called a Panther Purgings, and he kicked all of these what he considered to be the negative element out of the party. That negative element, which was kicked out of the party, one of those youngsters, he was young at the time, his name was Raymond Washington. Raymond Washington, who came up under Bunchy Carter, who was not a member of the LA chapter of the Black Panther Party because he was too young at the time, and that's the way they saw it at that time. He was too young and he was too rough, I say that. But he got that influence, and he admired Bunchy Carter so much that he wanted to, basically, since they was kicked out, he wanted to create his own version of it. And what he created, he called it the Cribs, like a baby crib, a play on the idea that they considered themselves to be baby Panthers. And later that name would metamorph into Crips. And that was the whole idea behind why they were started. Even the color blue, the original Panther uniform with black jeans, a powder blue t-shirt with Black Panther on it, which was a mistake. When they ordered the shirts, they ordered black, they sent powder blue shirts. And you know, they wasn't gonna throw the shirts away, so they wore them. A leather jacket, a beret, and a shotgun, that was the uniform. And so people outside of the party didn't know that powder blue shirt was a mistake. You know, and they say, well, why the blue shirt? Well, the blue represents the pain of the people. And so they took the blue, and that blue became their symbol, and that's why the Crips took the blue. And then back in California, back then, the Panthers always wore their berets and everything to the right to stand for righteousness. So the Crips, trying to separate themselves from that direct Panther influence, they went to the left. They wore everything to the left. They flags, everything went to the left. And then the Crips, and I'm not trying to get into a full gang history, but I kind of feel like this needs to be talked about.
Yeah.
What the Crips did then, Raymond Washington, to his credit, he had that same type of vision that people like Huey had. And he wanted everybody in California to be a Crip. So what he did is his groups would go through the streets and they would consolidate the smaller gangs. Hey, be a Crip. Hey, be a Crip. And they consolidate these gangs. The ones that didn't want to consolidate, they jump on them. And then they end up forming the rival gang called the Bloods. And they were still under that same Panther influence. They went with red because red was one of the colors of the African flag, which stood for the blood of the people. You know, black, the color of the people, green, the land, and red is the blood that was shed. So they took the red and the blood, and then they flew their flag to the right to get back in line with the Panthers, because they said that the Crips had went astray. They said they was keeping that that legacy together, but they had went astray. So the Bloods considered themselves to be the ones to get back in line with the Panthers. But this was all that direct influence. And this is what Huey believed, that these street gangs could be the cadres in the community, and that their number one job was to defend and protect the community. And this is why street gangs are so protective over their neighborhoods. This is why that even without the knowledge of why that legacy still lives. If you walk through the neighborhood and they don't know who you are, dude will walk up to you and be like, hey, where you from? Who you over here with? You know, they was taught way back then to put that check on people. So that was one of Huey's visions and one of his ideas. And one of the things that Bobby Seale said, that he said that the genius of Huey, he said Huey knew that when we originally went into the streets with those guns, that the media would paint us as some out of control street thugs. He said, and that's what Huey was trying to do. He was trying to catch the attention of the real street thugs, because the real street thugs would look at that and say, man, those are street thugs. Those are some out of the way street thugs. We need to hook up with them and see what they're about. And he said that's what Huey wanted. That's where he started. That was his ground base of starting. And then he wanted to get brothers, ex-military brothers, because they would know first aid, because they would know combat skills. He wanted to get ex-college or people that was in college, because then they could bring influx the party with that educational vibe. He wanted all of those elements to be brought into the party. That's why he worked. That's why he was willing to coalesce and create coalitions with so many other groups, even many members of the white hippie movement at that time. He wanted those people to be able to come into the party and then actually educate, teach, and help build up the chapters that he was creating and developing. So I just wanted to add that grassroots element to the history. Go ahead, Brother Wall.
Young Lords. Is that who you was trying to think of
Yeah.
earlier?
Yeah, that's it. That's
Lords.
it. Young Lords. Yeah, you should have said that a while
Rican.
ago.
My bad. I was letting you go. You hadn't said much. You know, I was letting you. You ride
that's
it out.
it.
Puerto Rican.
That was the
Young Lords.
Puerto Ricans, the Young Lords Party. Yeah.
Come on, War.
I'm working too, by the way.
No.
Okay. So, and going into that, I'm kind of jumping ahead, but with everything that Brother E and Psyche are bringing in, showed you how behind the scenes, how the power of the influence the Black Panther Party had. And so these were the things that the government was trying to neutralize that strength, because that began to basically entrench and incorporate everything that was going on in the communities, which created power amongst the people. And so as they attempted to, attack that power structure that was going on and developed by the Black Panther Party, it was morphing and turning into other, formations and other ideologies and perspectives. So elements of the Black Panther Party still continued and existed even beyond, obviously, COINTELPRO. So from that standpoint, the Panther operations started nationally, through Huey P. Newton getting incarcerated and coming out, and some of the seeds and stuff that was generated and perpetrated throughout the national chain of command or National Central Committee of the Black Panther Party. It started deteriorating the internal structure as a national body, and then you started having the conflict that was going on in terms of the ideology and the direction between the Panther Party. So it developed this East Coast, West Coast division internally. And these kind of things started eating at the national legacy and the national operations of the Black Panther Party in terms of ideology, in terms of thought, and in terms of what things ought to be more prevalent and important in the community. Because mind you, what you're dealing with at that point in time are different types of attacks taking place throughout the Panther Party and throughout the different chapters, because certain types of attacks were more prevalent in this part of the United States, and certain ones were more prevalent on the East Coast, so to speak. So it's different little things like that any way that the United States government could create programs to try to segregate and isolate the leadership, they would do so. So it was the whole conquer and divide thing, whether you can create the internal rift between the organizations, or if you can't directly attack them internally, you go ahead and assassinate them, which is, you know, what created the situation that happened with Fred Hampton in Chicago, as well as with the Bunchy Carter scenario. That goes that Psyche was talking about. That goes back to creating rifts between coalition organizations, which at that time was the U.S. or the United Slaves. So there, you created rifts between them, and you got them. You basically created snitch jackets, and you created false information to target, you know, to capitalize off of some of the street mentality, and you got members to kill each other of the organizations. So throughout these various forms of attack and direct warfare and terrorism, as I would call it, by the United States government, the Panther Party nationally ended up closing its operations, I think around 1974, between 74 and 76. So some of the chapters and some of the members of the Black Panther Party still continue the community programs, but slowly but surely over time, they necessarily did not operate under the name Black Panther Party. And from that as well, and Psyche, this you probably best to go into this. You did, as a result of those direct attacks, establish the BLA, or Black Liberation Army, which was an offshoot and a protective underground body force as a result of the Panther Party being, you know, literally sought after and killed by local police department and FBI, and just dealing with the internal rifts that was going on. So the Black Liberation Army was birthed out of the necessity of the continuity of the Panther and the membership needing to protect themselves. But it obviously got a bad name as a result of anything else in that time period, as well as now through the attitude of creating false, you know, false agenda through the media, and painting the Panther Party and its members as terrorists. So they, you know, flipping a script like that, and the people not being aware of these tactics that, you know, the CIA was well seasoned with at this point in time. It's easy to deploy that on our people, and that still happens to the day with social media. So as we move forward, we'll kind of get into that, bringing it into the new times. So from that standpoint, you still had, you know, the late 70s, early 80s, you still had Panthers that operated, and you even still had chapters that operated. And this kind of brings us back up into the idea of the forming of the new Black Panther Party, which us three was birthed out of. With that at the time was the new generation. But before you get to that, I want to talk about some of the influences of the new Black Panther Party with the Huey development of the party, the third development. From that, what happened was you had people like Mike McGee in Milwaukee that continued to operate under the Black Panther Party. You even still had operations in Chicago that kept things going under the Black Panther Party. So Mike McGee had a brand of the Panthers called the Black Panther Militia, I believe is what it was called. Yeah. And from that, him and even Daruba bin Wahad, who was original member of the Black Panther Party, also helped Aaron Michaels in who established the new Black Panther Party, come to fruition of that of the organization in the new Black Panther Party. And this was right around 1987 when Mike McGee and Aaron Michaels started working together, and him seeding Aaron with the ideology and information to actually establish a rebranding of the Black Panther Party. And it is ironic as it may seem, when Huey P. Newton was assassinated in 1989 is when Aaron Michaels decided to come forth with the official name of the organization in Dallas, Texas. They had been there had been a group of brothers and sisters that has been activists operating, you know, just doing community organizing and working in community and protesting some of the political oppressions that was taking place in Dallas, Texas, as early as I want to say probably 1980. I want to say maybe in 84, 85, 86, up in those years, but they were just these guys in black protesting. And then ultimately they ended up just saying, you know what, we're going to go ahead and take on the ideology of the Black Panther Party. And as they did this, what happened from that standpoint is like I said, as well as utilizing some of the tactics and operations that was borrowed from the Black Panther Party, in working with the a key leadership of the Black Panther Party back in those days. Aaron Michaels formed the new Black Panther Party. And it was actually Aaron Michaels. I want to give credit to David Foreman too. It was Aaron Michaels, David Foreman, and another brother named Keith Anderson, who initially established the new Black Panther Party in Dallas, Texas. Aaron Michaels being the chairman, David Foreman being the chief of staff, and Keith Anderson being the minister of defense at the time. And the new Black Panther Party was established in 1989. From that, the direction of new Black Panther Party, the idea behind this, and this goes into what we deal with today also, as well as with the different variations and forms of Panther, Black Panther. What happened was, one of the differences that separated the new Black Panther Party from the original party had to do with the fact that we were now operating more so from what we refer to as local autonomy. Local autonomy basically meant that we wasn't operating on a national body, because we recognized that the conditions that you're dealing with within your community are more important and have more impact in terms of your operations. One of the things that we learned from the mistakes, or I wouldn't even say the mistakes, but the actual attacks that took place with the Black Panther Party in the late 60s and early 70s, had to do with the decentralization and the attacking of the national chain of command. In doing so, a lot of the local chapters would start falling by the wayside as a result of depending too much and too heavily on a national chain of command and that national voice of attention. So the local autonomy basically said that you're responsible and accountable for developing whatever is necessary in your local community without the eccentric and the hype and the, I would say, the attention grabbing that you get from a national speaker, so to speak, or a national person. So one of the things that we learned through COINTELPRO when they talked about preventing the rise of the Black Messiah, it had to do with the fact that you created this scenario to where Black people would look to this individual leader as being somebody that everybody would galvanize and get behind. But knowing that the United States government had this mentality where they want to attack the head and, you know, destroy the head and the body will fall, by creating local autonomy, the attitude would be now that what we're going to do is going to go back and borrow from the Black Panther Party in terms of the leadership. But now what we're going to do is teach leadership throughout the community. Because again, now that you have this scenario where the community structure of the three legs was eliminated from the community in terms of what it takes to operate and move as a person. And when I say that, is we initially recognize that as each one of us grow up and raise our families, that we want our children to be involved in building themselves up. We want them to incorporate and adopt the idea of family and unifying the family, and then also extending that same love to the community and building up the community. But again, through the attacks and the mentality that was being putting the people back to sleep. Again, COINTELPRO, one of the aims and objectives was to put the people back to sleep. They eradicated the community part. So our goal as teaching leadership within the new Black Panther Party was to revitalize the idea that we must be leaders of our community, and everybody within the family structure must recognize its leadership roles and abilities and its obligation to also partake in the development of the community. So you're bringing that back into the fold. So through local autonomy, the idea was that we would not depend upon a national body for us to make our moves and operations, but we must develop ourselves as being strong leaders within our own right. And those are the things that we started reinstilling into the community through our new Black Panther Party operations. So from that, we redeveloped the 10-point platform and expounded upon it and made it a 14-point platform. And the new Black Panther Party geared more toward the development of leadership skills and styles amongst the community, and reconnecting the bridges that separated the community from each other. as well as one of the big things that you got to recognize, and this is kind of like how it was with Huey and Bobby in the Black Panther Party with the guns, how that ended up growing out of control from a media standpoint, and them taking that and using that and making that the symbol of the Black Panther Party. They ended up doing some of the same stuff with the new Black Panther Party. But I would like to say that from the new Black Panther Party, that became more of a way to try to target the operations of the new Black Panther Party. But in essence, I want to talk about why did the new Black Panther Party start using weapons.
Yeah.
Coming out of the late 80s, and then I'll let E and Psyche jump in at this point. Coming out of the late 80s and early 90s, the United States started dealing with the crack epidemic. It was real strong. And specifically in Dallas, Texas, I myself, prior to joining the new Black Panther Party, started seeing around that era, there was a rise in different types of sets that would control the crack epidemic in Dallas. And one of the biggest groups at that point in time that we dealt with was the Jamaican Posse. Now, the Jamaican Posse would arm themselves with street sweepers and automatic machine guns. So what we found in Dallas, the new Black Panther Party actually started carrying weapons as they were busting crack houses and shutting down crack houses, because the dope dealers themselves would be armed. So unlike the Black Panther Party of the 60s, where they started carrying guns to deal with the police, the new Black Panther Party started carrying guns to deal with the drug dealers. So when we would go and start in our community and start trying to shut down these drug houses, you had groups like the Jamaican Posse that would be armed to the teeth. And the police department, the police at that point in time wasn't literally targeting them across the United States. So we had to protect ourselves as we go out and try to deal with these drug dealers. So that's how the guns came into play with the new Black Panther Party. And a lot of people don't know that. So we basically armed ourselves in order to protect ourselves as we shut down the crack houses. And the most effective way that we dealt with shutting down the crack houses wasn't the fact that we had the weapons. The weapons were they wanted to get froggy and try to attack us. But what we actually used was camcorders and videotaping and writing down the license plates of the customers. So what we would do is we would stand in front of these crack houses or stand near them and would actually target all of the customers. Now, once you dry up the operation of the crack house, then they have to shut down. So that was the most effective way that we came out against them. So we wouldn't actually attack, obviously, drug dealers and create black on black crime. We would basically be armed to let them know, just like how with the Black Panther Party, when we're both armed, now we got to talk. So now that we're armed and they armed and we both mean business, they customers, when someone drives up, to go buy some crack and they see people right there in front of the place armed to the teeth, they're gonna just bag up and keep going, or just keep on going by. And as they do that, we taking pictures of them, getting their license plates, and next thing you know, they just stop coming. That word spread real fast that you got these crazy cats in black wearing berets with weapons standing in front of where I want to buy my drugs. So I'm not going back there. I'm gonna go somewhere else.
Straight up trade embargo. Yeah.
Yeah. So as we started becoming effective with that started making an impact in the community, and we're cleaning up our community. So the new Black Panther Party was all about cleaning up the community, all about creating community empowerment, and a lot of the negative stereotypes that come about today is obviously not telling that true side of the story.
Right.
E or Psyche, y'all want to jump in at all on this?
Don't know. Psyche?
Well, I'll add something, a couple of things that you to add on to a few things that you said a while ago. One, I'm gonna add on to when you mentioned the three original founders of the new Black Panther Party: David Foreman, Brother Keith, and Aaron. And reason I'm bringing this up is because it ties back into what I said earlier about what Fred Hampton was doing in Chicago. David was originally from Chicago, right?
Yes, yeah. He was. And he was in the gang.
He was a Black P Stone.
Yep.
I remember David telling me when I asked him why did he join or why did he become a member of the party, He said that back when he was young and he was a Peace Stone, that he remembered the Panthers coming through the neighborhood, you know, trying to organize them. And he was one of the brothers that was like, man, I ain't trying to hear that. And he said he felt like he had missed a great opportunity when they were doing the organizing. So when he became older, you know, then he was ready to don his beret. But that just, the reason I mentioned that is because it leads back into what the mission that Huey P. Newton gave Fred Hampton in Chicago, essentially to politicize the street gangs. And David Foreman just happened to be one of those guys who was a youngster at the time that wasn't ready, that ran into that influence, who ended up 20 years later becoming a foundation of the redevelopment of the Panther Party in Dallas, Texas. But and also I wanted to add to this when Brother Wall was talking about the BLA and the BLA being a response to the attacks and the provocations against the party and around that time. See, these brothers that has always been a principle of revolution. One of the revolutionary principles is that you have to have an above ground political organization and you have to have an underground military organization. The above ground political organization serves to educate the people, and the underground military organization serves to educate the oppressor. I mean, and they must work together, but cannot be tied together. The above ground political organization got to be like, I don't know who the hell that is. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? And at the same time, being able to give instructions to the underground military organization. And I say that because that is an essential principle of revolution, but Huey and them was learning it in the process of being attacked. So these things were being developed late. They wasn't developed and ready to be instituted. They were being developed as a reaction to those attacks instead of already being in place. And the BLA primarily came out of the East Coast, and they never spoke about it. And there was never any real just stringent organization of it, but it was an understanding of the need for the Black Liberation Army after the above ground political organization started being attacked. One of the things that the above ground political organization had to do, and Brother Ward talked about that chiefly, it had to educate the people. It had to strengthen the neighborhood. It had to uplift the community. It had to build leadership. It had to build families. That's the job of the above ground political organization. And then once attacks start coming up on the above ground political organization, then things have to happen underground in order to defend the above ground political organization. And the above ground political organization can't do those things and can't even be tied to that. But the above ground political organization has to be able to interpret those acts to the people. Because if there's no one to interpret the acts, then the oppressor will interpret the acts for them. And they'll always interpret those acts negatively. So the above ground political organization must keep its hands clean and simply teach, educate, and interpret what's going on to the mass of the people. And the underground military organization might do things that may be seen as reprehensible, but it may be required. And that's what was going on back then in the 60s. Those brothers and those sisters started seeing the need. People like Assata Shakur, people like Matula Shakur, these people started seeing the need for that underground military organization. And that was spawned in the form of the BLA, the Black Liberation Army. And so I just wanted to add a little bit of that to understand where those things came from. Huey and them didn't, and that's where Huey and Eldridge kind of split. Because Huey, for all of his genius, never really saw, or he never publicly expressed the need for the military organization. And then Eldridge thought that the above ground organization was supposed to be the military organization. And that was the problem. The Black Panther Party was supposed to be the military organization. So he wanted to take the Black Panther Party and go on the attack. And Huey was like, no, are you crazy? You can't do that. But Huey never understood that the time had come for the military organization to be developed. So that's where they kind of had they little conflict. But in my opinion, in that time, both needed to exist. But exactly the way revolutionary theorists say that it need to exist. They need to exist and be completely separate, but be helping each other by doing what each other needs. And that's the above ground political organization doing the political work, and the below ground, the underground military organization doing the military work. And I'll say this, and then pass it on. Maybe Brother E has something to say. Huey said this. He said that the gorilla is the perfect man, and this kind of talks about this. When he said the gorilla is the perfect man, he said the gorilla is both the political theoretician and the military fighter. He is the military, he's the leader, and he is the soldier. If he's separated from the team, the gorilla is able to be a one-man army. He's able to, if he has no supplies, he's able to take supplies from his surroundings and basically keep on moving. He's able to improvise. So he said the gorilla is the perfect man because he's both mind and body. He's the fighter and he's the thinker. And that's kind of, from an individual standpoint, that's what the gorilla is. But from a complete community revolutionary standpoint, the guerrilla then becomes the political organization and the below ground military organization. And that's all I wanted to add to that.
I want to, I'm gonna come back around to David, but I want to kind of give an idea of what all of this is about. Whenever there's, the U.S. government, Hoover and them had a memo talking about with COINTELPRO, saying that part of their mission was to prevent the rise of another Black Messiah, where at the time, the Black Messiahs were essentially Martin and Malcolm. So focusing more on Malcolm here, being that he had that kind of role within the movement, within our people's psyche and the community and all of that. When Malcolm left this earth, when he was assassinated, when he was murdered, it created a vacuum, it created a void for that sort of messiahship. And something to understand about Malcolm is that he was very much the nationalist and the Pan-Africanist. He was practical and he was cultural. So when he passed, there developed a schism, a dichotomy of culture versus practicality. And the party, essentially declaring themselves the ideological heirs of Malcolm X, picked up the mantle of the practicum, being grassroots, being in the streets, being with the people, developing programs, all of those sorts of things. There was another organization who had, I guess, notoriety. There are other organizations, but in this instance, it was the United Organization headed by Maulana Karenga. And they're developed in large part due to the federal government, again, with COINTELPRO sending letters of discontent between the two. I'm gonna send Ryan a letter saying, when I see you, I'm at you, we're gonna fight. You not knowing that actually came from the feds and not me. Okay, now we got a beef. We got an East Coast, West Coast rivalry that never existed. Now it grows and it gets bigger. Yeah. So with that falling out, there was this parting of ways between the practical and cultural, the theory and the application. So kind of fast forwarding a little bit, the brother that we've mentioned a couple of times, David Foreman, with his growth from being a peace stone and having that seed of the party placed in his psyche when he was younger, growing into that and evolving later on. Again, evolution is what all of this is about for all of us. This evolution, once he got to Dallas and grew into a beret, and that seed began to blossom within his own mentality, he joined the party, became a very prominent and important figure within the party, the organizing and movements and even just thought development and whatnot. Further, when I met this brother, we actually bumped heads because of the same type of dichotomy. He was all about the practicality. I came in with a background of theory. Again, I go back and say that's why I say I was the big head, because I was all study. And by the time I got to the party, had endeavored in some things in the application, but not as broad and as grassroots, so to speak, as the party. So when I met David, he was, practicality, application. And here I am with all this theory, this culture, and going back to Africa, at least mentally, and the idea that gets thrown out there, dashikis and knowing some Swahili and all of those sorts of things. So we kind of bumped heads a bit. loudly too, very, very loudly. But by the time I left and came to Florida, you know, you check back on folks, you keep in touch, you find out what's going on with them. Now, mind you, this man was my elder. I don't know if he, what, 10 years older, 15 years older, something like that.
About 15.
About 15 years
15
older.
or 20.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
I think when you was 27, David was like 51, 52,
damn.
something.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
20
we'll
years.
say 20 years. 20 years my elder. So by the time I left, I'm around 30. So he's in his, what, 60, 50, 60, something like that, whatever. Um, the last time I had real contact, this man who was a peace stone, who had this seed evolve and become this tree of the new Black Panther Party later on, by the time we parted ways with all our interactions, and we had love for each other, there was never any doubt for that, but we bumped like men bump, you know, like Q and Bunchy went out, they had to come to fisticuffs, wear each other out, and then sit down and have a talk. So by the time I left, and I'm checking back on him, this man, this former peace stone, was investigating how he could repatriate to Africa. So he was wanting to move back to the continent. He had such a paradigm shift. The dynamic in his thought process changed so much from his experience and exposure to what it is the party is supposed to be about, that he evolved to a point that he was no longer this thug on the street, but this dude who understood and appreciated, you know, in a Richard Pryor kind of way. You know, when Richard Pryor went to Africa, he said he had a paradigm shift because he looked at the hotel room and he saw all of these folks that looked like him operating stores and businesses and being the police and being the politicians and the teachers. He said, Richard Pryor said, the one thing he didn't see was niggas. He was surrounded by all these people that looked just like him and he saw no niggas. And from that point, he swore to never use the word nigga in his routine again and didn't. So David had this similar type of epiphany that moved him, that was a part of his evolution from that peace tone to the nationalistic boots on the ground type cat, to he's gotten this theory and has grown to that point that he actually looked to becoming an actual citizen of, I don't know if it was Liberia or Ghana, I think it was maybe Ghana. So that's kind of almost the archetype, that's the ideal. Not necessarily that we want Black folks to go to Africa, but there is at some point we have to go to Africa. You know, we have to investigate ourselves beyond our imprisonment here, which is what happened to him. He investigated it beyond and was just absorbed by it. So that's the overarching idea through all of what we do, is to evolve us back. You know, and it's kind of almost antithetical to evolve back. You know, that's what the idea is, to find that lost mind. So yeah, David serves as like, if I've done anything right in this world, you know, I made an influence on this man and got him to evolve to a point that he took his destiny to another level. So you're taking control of his destiny on a whole different, you know, idea, something that, you know, is even beyond me. You know, he got me beat because I've never investigated that, you know, to that degree, you know, idea and whatnot. But he actually was looking into, what do I need, joining, you know, talking to people, finding out the logistics of moving to the motherland. So yeah, he's the man.
It's just crazy to think, you know, that this idea of the land of the free and the home of the brave, you have to go to Africa to see representation of like something that you want, like something that you should be able to have here. But it's like one of those things that just consistently, as we've been talking this entire time, is just like, you see the barriers that have been put up over the years. You see the leaders that have been like a focal point of like hope and togetherness and everything. And like, you take out those leaders and it's just like, fuck, man. Like, it's just, it's crazy. It's crazy, some of the stuff, the way this plays out. And with that being said, would this be a good time to get into what happened in Jasper?
Yeah, I think because we're leading right up. That's probably the next big event after the founding. You know, did some things community-wise and all of that. But the next big thing where things really started taking a shift was right around that time, and that's the time around when all of the three of us came together was just before that event. So it was like our first big endeavor together.
Yeah.
So, and I know War has the best memory. I don't know, I haven't asked Psych, but I know War's got a better memory of all of that than I do. That and the fact that I was just a soldier at the time, so I didn't get to hear a lot of the conversation. I'm still kind of bitter about that, you know, but whatever, it's all good. But so I'll give it to you.
All right, let me just give a little background leading up to that. Like I said, a lot of the beginnings of the new Black Panther Party had to do with, in terms of how we used the weapons, had to do with how we were working on, cleaning up the community. So moving forward a little bit, as the new Black Panther Party uh, worked on becoming national, a national body, in terms of being able to create and duplicate the process from the local autonomy to other communities. We ended up working in Gary, Indiana. We had a chapter there, and unfortunately, I can't remember the brother's name who led that chapter. We also ended up meeting up with a guy named Kwaku Duran in LA on the East Coast, who had a chapter, an organization of the Panthers called the Black Panther Vanguard. So at that point in time, mind you, we're in our early infancy days of establishing a new Black Panther Party, but we're reaching out and building with Black Panther, other Black Panther brands and branches that were also operating across the United States, even though the national Black Panther Party had stopped operating. But that did not stop the Panther use. And a lot of people don't know that. And that, again, that has a lot to do with the fact that you didn't have a national wave that would have the media sensationalism that, that got fabricated through COINTELPRO. So we met with Kwaku Duran, the leadership of the new Black Panther Party in Dallas, met with Kwaku Duran, and we formed a joint operation at that point in time, and we referred to ourselves as the new Black Panther Party Vanguard. So we went under a name change, and we merged with his operation, and that gave us an opportunity to deal with nationally spreading the message of the new Black Panther Party and the ideology that basically had to do with how we deal with the correct moves that needed to be made as a result of COINTELPRO and operations that went against our people. So the idea at that time, again, was to establish leadership and within the community and reteach that as a core principle to our people. So from that as well, there was issues going on a different front that led to the new Black Panther Party becoming a household name, and that had to do with a guy named Khalid Abdul Muhammad, who was at that time the national spokesman of the Nation of Islam here in the United States. Khalid Muhammad ended up dealing with some things within the Nation of Islam that got him ostracized by the Nation of Islam. And COINTELPRO, from that standpoint, or whatever we want to call it, let's just say America targeting is people domestically, because it was obviously the name COINTELPRO was an operation, but the tactics continued on beyond that and existed before that. So the thing is, Khalid Muhammad was basically a target of these same type of attacks through the Nation of Islam. They were targeted. So from that standpoint, a wedge between him, Louis Farrakhan developed, and certain people were put in positions to try to assassinate Khalid. One of the assassination attempts occurred in, I believe it was in LA. And as a result of that, Khalid, one of his safe houses was in Dallas, Texas. And he was introduced to these brothers called the New Black Panther Party because of our, at that time, again, being seasoned through dealing with the police, how to deal with the drug dealers and the police department. From that standpoint, what happened was Khalid was introduced to us because we would, operate and be able to arm ourselves and knew how to run good security. So he was introduced to the New Black Panther Party. He became so impressed with our discipline at that time that what he started doing is organizing and working with us individually, not as through the nation, not as a representative of the Nation of Islam, but just through Khalid Muhammad and the strength that he built through his works internationally. So that led him to start working with us. So as Khalid Muhammad started working with us and ended up breaking his affiliation with the Nation of Islam, what happened at that point in time, he finally ended up creating a situation where he and Aaron Michaels decided, hey, let's go ahead and create a national leadership. And again, we're operating through local autonomy. The national chain of command would be run a little bit different than it would be back in the day in the 60s. The idea at that point is you still had local autonomy, but you had this national connection that will bridge the local chapters. So from that standpoint, Khalid worked with the new Black Panther Party. Well, and one of the endeavors that took place, and this was actually before Khalid became, right around the time, let me say, that he became the national chairman, but the Jasper operation was before that. There was a brother by the name of James Byrd Jr. who basically got decapitated in a city called Jasper, Texas.
Got dismembered.
Dismembered, yeah.
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 That wasn't just his head; his whole body
Yeah.
started getting
Yeah.
ripped apart.
Disintegrated.
So from that standpoint, the Klan actually drugged 3 members of the Klan, got caught anyway, and drugged him behind his vehicle until his body, came apart. And we received information about this, and people from the community, Black people in the community, reached out to the Black Panther, the new Black Panther Party, to come out there and assist them because of the blatant racist attacks that was happening with the Klan. And to tell you how deep this was, you literally had situation where the leadership of the local police department were being ran by the Klan. You were talking about your community that was still dealing with outright segregation, and we're talking, 1993, 94? No, I'm sorry, 96, 1996, and you still are dealing with segregation and blatant racism and Klan actively walking around in hoods.
And the
So,
Klan, and just to emphasize that the police department is being run by Klan members openly.
Openly.
You got him now. It's like, yeah, he's probably Klan, maybe dig some dirt up on. No. Hi, I'm the sheriff, and I'm a Klansman on the weekends. So just to kind of emphasize, this was that level stuff.
In the
So go
90s.
ahead, bro.
In the 90s. Yeah.
In the 90s.
Dang.
So, go ahead, bro.
So from that standpoint, when the community reached out to us, and a lot of people obviously don't know this because this is not something that was advertised through the media, but we actually did a few maneuvers into Jasper, pronouncing ourselves and making a national move to do an intel and finding out the situation. And that's when we discovered all this was legit and was actually going on. As a result of that, the Klan actually, in terms of trying to boast about the situation of actually killing a Black man and getting away with it, because this is what was happening at the time, even though you had 3 people that were getting ready to be prosecuted, the Klan was just moving and doing their thing, and they wanted to celebrate basically the martyrism of that operation. So they had planned a march throughout the Black community to basically boast about the operation and to continue to instill fear and basically let it be known that, look, y'all better stay in y'all place. And we letting y'all know that we're willing to die for what we believe in. That made it back to us.
Kill you for what we believe in.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you made martyrs of 3 men. We okay with that. That was the mentality. But you stay in your place. So from that standpoint, it made it back to us on that note. And so we had planned a maneuver to go down and basically corner off and quarantine the Black community to prevent the Klan from coming inside armed. We actually even made a call to the police department, letting them know that, look, this is what's going on. You need to put an end to it, or we will be down there. We talked to the chief of police at the time, and it was myself, Aaron Michaels, David Foreman, a few of the national leadership, or it wasn't even national leadership at the time. It was still local, but we worked with people nationally. Khalid Muhammad was there, but we had a phone conference, and on that phone conference, the chief of police flat out told us, look, if y'all enter our city, we are going to arrest y'all.
Yeah.
He said, whether you break any laws or not, you will be arrested if you come down here and mess with what we got going on. that came straight out of his mouth, knowing that the whole point is we put a call out letting him know that the Klan can't be marching through the black community. And we received a call and we're going to come down there and we're going to deal with that. He flat out just told us that he's going to arrest us. It had nothing to do with us breaking the law. We will be arrested and detained for even stepping foot in his city.
Oh, wow.
We flat out told him, well, get ready to arrest us because we coming. And so that was the mentality. So we organized a maneuver to go down there, and Khalid Muhammad at the time, working through the new Black Panther Party, was very eccentric in being able to put the word out and helping us galvanize members and soldiers to go down there. So as we planned for this, mind you, we're still dealing with FBI operations, you know, in terms of how they do everything and do surveillance. So this is when it really started hitting home with me, because it wasn't until the Jasper incident that I actually started seeing FBI follow me and you know, even had people sneak into my backyard. And at that point, I knew they was planting some devices or doing something, because where I live, there was no reason for white folks to be in my backyard, especially on an acre of land with a fence. So these are the kind of things that was happening. And they was as bold as enough as to just park in front of my house. And they parked in front of several key leadership houses and just monitor us, follow us around wherever we go. And they basically was just trying to make sure that they could either, one, intimidate us. Number two, we didn't let it be known exactly how we were going to go about doing the tactical maneuver. So they was trying to do the best they could to gather information on the situation. So at that point, that's when we started seeing how this was going to play out. As a result of that, also what happened is we recognized the fact that the FBI was going to make sure that there wasn't a quote unquote race war or race riot between us and the Klan, because we meant business. And as far as we know, the Klan meant business. So we had every intent on going down there with our weapons and defending the black community, making sure that they didn't march through it. They had every intent on going down there, on being down there and doing their march through the black community. FBI actually ended up seizing jurisdiction of Jasper and holding the local police department at bay. This is how crazy it got. It got to the point to where they took jurisdiction over the local police department, called in the state troopers and federal agents, and they basically just snuffed the local operations and prevented them from basically openly wearing their hoods and trying to go into the black community. So they barricaded off the black community, didn't let the Klan go into the black community, and as a result, the Klan decided to hold a rally in downtown Jasper and attempt to do the same thing. So we were in a black community, they were downtown, and when we actually went into the city on this first maneuver, we went through the black community, assured them, you know, that, hey, if we work together as a people, they can't operate like this. And you know, basically from that standpoint, the idea was that we help to empower the people and work toward trying to get rid of the fear that they had. And this was crazy because to us, coming out of Dallas, Texas, we obviously dealt with a lot of racism, but this is my first time ever personally seeing black folks just straight out fear and scared of white people. And the people of that city was just literally the black community. Most of them were just scared. I mean, and one of the crazy things that happened about this, and this is one of the things that's little known about that scenario, is that our intel also had reported that Jesse Jackson also knew about us going down in the community and had planned an alternate march with the black people of the community and had put out a memo telling the people of Jasper the best way and the best practice for y'all to be able to empower yourselves and make sure no one's out at night and y'all walking in pairs in the community. So we felt like a lot of the message that he had put out basically just bought into the idea that you're going to be attacked and you just need to accept the fact that white folks are going to continue to terrorize your city. We didn't like that. We was completely against the message and information he was putting out, because he was basically making it sound like y'all should just live with the fact that y'all are going to be attacked, live with the fact that y'all are going to be terrorized, live with the fact that y'all are going to be brutalized, and just, hey, deal with it. No, our attitude was, you need to be defiant, you need to stand up for yourselves. Y'all are a country town. Country towns are like in Texas is like the main places where you carry your shotguns on the back of your truck, and you know,
Absolutely.
it don't make sense. And you know, these are the areas where I used to go down and hunt when I was a little kid. So you know, when I was brought up, my dad brought me up on hunting and fishing. We would go down to East Texas and hunt, and this is where I would see, you know, people with their rifles and shotguns and who could shoot like shoot as good as anybody that was in the military or any police officer, crack shots, but obviously for shooting deer. But the point I'm getting at is that Black people were able to defend themselves, but they didn't look at it from that perspective. So we brought a new perspective in terms of what a weapon means. It's not just hunting and fishing, it's to protect yourself.
Yeah.
And so we countered the message that was being put out by Jackson because we didn't want our people to be instilled with fear, and we didn't want our people to basically feel like they couldn't go out at night. That we just thought that was crazy. You know, come 9 p.m., he said, don't go out at night if you're Black.
You know,
what kind of mess is that?
What's crazy, I was talking with a real good friend of mine yesterday, and I brought up Jasper, and he was like, oh, that's a sundown. And I was just like,
yeah.
He was like, you know what I was like, I got no idea what a sundown is. And he was like, yeah, that's one of the towns. It's like, that it's just like, man, Black people can't be out at night because they'll get murdered and it'll get covered up.
Yep.
And I'm like, what the fuck? That's a term? Like, that's known. Like,
oh yeah. And just to give you an idea, that's not a 1990s thing. There's a city out here in Florida that Warren and I used to go to you know, play with the alligators and whatnot. And it's called Christmas, Florida. Ironic, right? Christmas, Florida. And when I told some folks at the job, you know, a few days later after my first couple of times going out there, I told them, yeah, we went to Christmas, Florida and blah, blah. And they were like, oh, that's cool, but just make sure you're out of there before the sun goes down, before it gets dark out there. You don't want to be out there. And sure enough, when you make a turn off the main highway into the town, there's a big Christmas tree that you know you're in Christmas, Florida. And a couple of country miles down, every other house has a rebel flag. Yep. So yeah, absolutely. That's still what 2020. Yeah, it's still absolutely a thing.
And I want to add this to the Jasper story. I think this is important, especially for upcoming and growing revolutionaries. As it was said earlier, that was our first, especially for me and Brother E, that was one of our first field maneuvers. So, you know, we was young. I was younger than him, you know, and we was hyped. We thought we were supposed to go to Jasper. It was going to be all out gunplay. We were supposed to die. We were supposed to die for the cause. That's what we thought. You know, there's nowhere in the world that guys out of the city is supposed to march through this country town with SKSs and AKs and shotguns, and you got all this police enforcement out there, and we're not going to get murdered.
And it's all on TV. Yeah. International.
Yeah, that was our whole thinking. And while we thinking this, you know, Brother David Foreman, he's older, he's more seasoned, and he would just lean back and he was watching us, and he was, you know, smirking, smiling. And, you know, I would find out later why he was smiling. But, he was smiling at us and all this talk we were doing about how we feel to go die. And then we marched into Jasper, and the sheriff made his little threats, and he couldn't uphold any of them. And we marched through Jasper, and they moved. I'm talking about everybody moved completely out of the way as we moved through Jasper and did what we needed to do in Jasper. And then we came back from Jasper, and we had a meeting after. We had a debriefing after we got back from Jasper. And I remember us sitting in the headquarters. I think I was like 22 years old, and we was all talking, and David Foreman would just lean back, listen, and he said, we were kind of a little disappointed that we didn't die. Especially E, but E was disappointed. And then Brother David Foreman leaned back, and the reason I bring this up because this is a lesson, and this is a lesson that informed how I operated while I was in prison. That gave me the understanding of how to organize, and gave me the understanding of how to sometimes resist oppression in prison. Because David Foreman leaned back in his chair, and he said, "Y'all thought y'all were gonna die?" He said, "Y'all thought we got y'all together and sent y'all into Jasper because we were sending y'all to die?" He said, "We wasn't sending y'all to die. We knew y'all wasn't going to die." He said, "We've sent y'all there to learn one major lesson." And we was, sitting there listening. And we were like, "What was that?" He said, "We needed y'all to go down there and recognize that when y'all working together, that y'all's, excuse my language, I don't curse usually, but there's only one way for me to express how he said this. He said, we wanted y'all to realize y'all are some bad motherfuckers." That's what he told us. And he said, and the point was, and the whole point was, when you come together under a righteous cause with an understanding of the law and operating within your rights, that you cannot be touched. He wanted us to grasp that.
Mm.
And I would use that in prison at times when they would abuse some brothers, at times when they were 100% on the wrong side of the law. I would stand, and I would have other inmates stand with me, and they would always back down the same way they did in Jasper.
Wow.
At the entirety of the prison with them, they would back down every single time. One time, I'll give you an quick example. The one time a sergeant came in, and they would to jump on his brother unprovokedly because he was standing up watching television. You can't stand up in the day room. He was standing up, and they came in, snatched the brother, pulled him outside, slammed him against the glass. The brother had to look on his face like a sad dog, like, "Please, somebody help me." And I stood up, and brother asked me, said, "What you finna do?" I said, "I don't know. I'm probably finna get myself in trouble though, but I can't just sit back and watch the brother get done like this." And so when I went to the glass and I beat on the glass, and the sergeant, he looked through the glass at me, he said, "Go sit down before I get you." And I told him, "You ain't," he said, "No," he said, "Go sit down before I play with your life." That's what he told me. And I said, "You can't play with my life. My life done been played with already. I'm sitting in prison doing 2 counts of 20s and 2 counts of 10s. I don't have a life. You can't play with my life." And when I said this, and he opened the door to try to make an example out of me, all the brothers stood up in the day room, and they rushed the door, and he slammed the door back. He closed it back. And they called a lieutenant down there. And as I talked to the lieutenant with all the brothers and making a circle around the lieutenant asked us, "What do we need to do in order for y'all to back down?" And I told him, "It's simple. I don't want it to, we're not trying to take over your prison.
Yeah.
Let your brother go and check your sergeant." And he did just that. And that courage to do that, or that understanding that we had that type of power, I learned that during that situation in Jasper. I learned that then because we had Texas Rangers, we had the local Jasper Police Department, we had the National Guard, we had all of this. We had a helicopter following us everywhere we went.
Wow.
And we was just some guys who read some books and grabbed a gun and put on some black and marched into the city, and there was nothing they could do with us. And that is not only is it informing, but it's empowering when you understand the power of knowledge. And I just wanted to add that to that Jasper background.
And the weapons were loaded.
Oh yeah, and they was loaded. That's another thing. That's another question I had to field for 17 years while I was in prison, because they put out that false information.
Yeah.
The sheriff, wasn't his name Billy Rawls?
I don't even remember his name, but it wasn't even just the sheriff, but it was the I want to say that went on the, what is you call the news wire, where they just put out.
Everybody said it.
Yeah.
UPI.
And the brothers would ask me in prison, "Why did y'all march down there with no bullets in your gun?" And
right.
I'd have to give them education on propaganda, and I could assure them that the guns were loaded, because at the time, as Brother E said, I was just a soldier, and I was one of the guys that loaded a lot of them and cleaned a lot of them.
Yeah.
That was my job. While the big heads like War was in their meeting, I was cleaning guns and loading guns.
One quick moment where we almost at the end, but I do want to bring up some logistics about Jasper that wasn't known by a lot of the membership, as well as Psyche and E. one of the intel informations that we had received was that the Klan, some of them were going to secretly be hiding throughout the route in the Black community, because mind you, we're in the country. So there's areas where it's real thickets. So we had a few members of our delegation that had actually along the streets that we was one of the main roads where the body was dragged that we was marching on. That road was real heavily wooded on both sides of the road. So we had a couple of our members who actually had to veer off into the woods and march in unison with us to make sure that the tree lines were actually didn't have snipers, because we had received information that they was going to have some snipers out in the woods. And again, going back to the whole mentality about the country, is when I used to go deer hunting, you know, that was the thing. You are able to go out and you put something through a scope. So we had to have some members that actually basically check the trails and check the woods as we was marching to make sure that we wasn't actually being attacked. And so we did put out the mentality to the membership, you know, the leadership. We did tell the members in the community that, look, this something may happen. You do need to go into this knowing that you may not come back. So the threat, I wouldn't even call it a threat, the guarantee that this is a real deal situation was real. But at the same time, our intent was, and it was a strategy, and it's always been used, you know, to for the benefit, is that the media and as well as the FBI doing their job, because they don't want a race riot, right? So knowing that the FBI did not want, and you had an international media that came down to Jasper. So the FBI didn't want Jasper to be a showdown to where you saw Klan members and Black folks who was just basically trying to defend the community have a bloodbath. So the FBI was doing it, hoping that the FBI do their job, and knowing that the media was there to film the situation. That is what we use to work in our favor to make sure that everything would stay safe. But we also realize that you have your lone wolves. We also realize that you do have Klan members that are crazy, and you do have people that want a race war. To this day, there's a white supremacists want a race war. So from that standpoint, we had to make sure certain members were armed, and we strategically created a military pattern to where we had shot groups, where you had a shotgun up front, you had a assault rifle team that was behind, and then we even had some people that had handguns to protect the inner circle of the march. So there was a lot of tactical logistics that we had in place. Go ahead, Brother Psyche.
Just an add on, and people like me, because I had convictions, who wasn't allowed to carry weapons in the public, or one of them wouldn't allow me to carry a weapon. I was walking next to E, who had an extra one on his back.
Yeah,
Always looking out for my brother, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And mind you, this was the first trip to Jasper. So I don't know, I know we're short on, we're down to the last minute. So maybe next time we start off with the second trip to Jasper.
Right.
Like I said, this was the first one. There's a round two.
Yeah.
Round two. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, there was many trips we made, but there was two publicized media events.
Yeah.
So yeah, in this one, so the whole point I'm getting at, and this is just in reference to how, like even now, going into the situation where you have what they call themselves a Not Fucking Around coalition, marching with weapons. When we had to do it back in the day as a new Black Panther Party, doing that, our situation was basically we were going into a war zone, and we had to tactfully make sure that we strategically utilized military discipline and military pattern when we did it, because it wasn't just us walking in an area where we were not under attack. We literally went into the situation because we were told that we were going to be attacked. So from that standpoint, we had to literally use real tactical operations and logistics. And this is part of the reason why the FBI was following us, because from their perspective, we actually were planning to address the race fight and be ready to fight the Klan.
Yeah. Man.
So I don't know where we are with time. So it's a lot that we can cover, and we can just jump back into this in the next show.
Well, yeah, because we can, because we can go. I'm sure you guys got stories for days. Why don't we kind of get into like what's the future looking like? Like where everything's at right now? Like what do you guys see as the vision?
Well, one of the things I want to first bring up is that I would say now we are faced with a different dynamic than I personally have experienced in the movement, and as to where things are being addressed from a social, a virtual environment, so to speak, especially with the situation with COVID-19. This is changing the dynamics in terms of the Black community and just community organizing in general. So we're still in the process of figuring this out and figuring out how we're going to move and utilize this dynamic, but at the same time, not allow ourselves to be victimized by the overbearance of misinformation that can be that is portrayed throughout social media. One of the things that I've always hated about the social media as a main form, or a not the main form, but just a dynamic form of operation, is that it's so much misinformation that can be put out there. And knowing that, you know, we're dealing with a clandestine operation against us as well, still to this day, and just organizing and galvanizing the people, then social media becomes a real new battleground that we have to deal with. So I want to say we're still working these dynamics out, because we're dealing with a situation now that where we have a real threat, which is COVID-19, regardless of getting into the conspiracy as to what it is, how it came about, where is it going. Knowing that people are dying, we have to deal with that dynamic. At the same time, we don't want to be stifled to the point to where we're not having boots on the ground anymore, but we have to be able to address things in a scenario to where we have to give its rightfully due place, and recognize that social distancing must be the order of the day as we move and we organize and we do what we do. Ian, Psyche, I want to add to that.
Well, based on the fact for almost 2 decades, my activism had to do with education. It had to do with teaching and restructuring the minds of people who had never even considered revolutionary ideas. So to me, the future deals more with education and economic empowerment, to me. And I believe that those are the things which will help make drastic changes in the community. If there is a development of an understanding of organizing personal finance, development economics, and not just finances, but when I say economics, the proper utilization of resources in a way that uplifts the community, and the education needed to actually be a community instead of just a hood, a covered place. Instead of a covered place, an actual community. And that's where I think the future is going. And that's what I think that all activists should be connected to in some way, form, or fashion.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be really challenging for us, because even just amongst the three of us, we spent all of these years developing an understanding and a realizing, basically making it real, taking that theory and materializing the ideas, the African-centered ideas of communalism. You know, African people, as opposed to, you know, the European concepts of a community. If you just look at things like the Magna Carta and all of these Declaration of Individual Rights and whatnot, that's the antithesis to the African lifestyle, African mentality, which is one of community. I am because you are. Literally, that's our mindset. That's throughout the continent. So to now be in a situation where we cannot, because of COVID or whatever, exercise that communal being in a real physical analog sense. You know, we've got this mindset, all right, I'm community, I'm the people, and, you know, programs and blah, blah, blah. Well, now we got COVID going on, so we need to, you know, wind it back and figure something else out. So yeah, it's going to be challenging, just because we're looking at a different landscape, and on the one hand, utilizing this detachment of the individual, and, you know, doing Zoom things and podcasts, and, you know, this distance, while in using those venues to attempt to project, instill, educate this sense of togetherness, so it's going to be really, really interesting to see how it plays out. I mean, the objectives overall are essentially the same, but yeah, obviously the tactics are going to have to morph majorly and quickly in order to get anything really productive going.
Well, given the current times and the fact that, we don't know what it's going to look like going forward for anybody,
Yeah.
I think this is a good time to plug into social media. It's a good time to get this story out there in a way that shows like a lot more pieces that might not have been shown in other like little clips and like misinformation and shit like that. Yeah, it's I appreciate you guys doing this. I appreciate you guys like talking about this, talking about the history, talking about your experience with this, because I think it's important.
Yeah, and this is, we know that, and again, it's another tightrope that we're learning, have learned, continue to learn to walk is appealing. Obviously, our desires to appeal to the masses of Black folk. That's who we are. That's our passion. That's where we need to be. At the same time, understanding the situation and the landscape that we're in, having somebody with a handshake that's outside of the immediate community, having relationships with folks that are not a part necessarily directly of that community, even just for the sake of communication. Up until I guess a few days ago, even the U.S. and China had consulates and diplomats in each other's country, to maintain a relationship, to maintain a dialogue, so that there's no misunderstanding.
Right.
Having those closed now, who knows what's going to happen? But yeah, utilizing and developing those, I think, is going to be essential, because as much as we galvanize and bring together our community, whatever we can do with the current situation, there's still going to be a need, just based on resources and understandings, for everybody to be able to exchange information on a comrade level, on a personable level. Just because our first concern is our community doesn't mean that we're not concerned about others as well. The idea that I heard years and years ago by one of the ancestors, a scholar, said that if we work to bring African people up, necessarily the human condition will improve and come up. Why? Because African people are on the bottom. Whether it's in Africa or whether it's in the US or wherever country you go, you will find Black folk at the bottom of the social and economic scale, period. So as we work to bring up and improve the life of our communities, because everybody else's community depends on our community. I mean, let's face it, everything you buy, your cell phones, your bread, all of these types of things at some point have some relationship with Africa. Africa is the breadbasket of the world. Your gold, your silicon, your diamonds, all of that stuff comes out of there. And so as the condition of not only the continent physically, but the condition of the people improves, then necessarily the condition mentally, not I have, somebody has a Lamborghini, that sort of nonsense, but the actual life and the meaning and the purpose and the human condition itself will necessarily improve. So it's never a situation, and that's one of the myths. We used to have a flyer back in the day that listed off some of the myths of the Panther Party that we would pass out. And one of the myths is that we are racist, and that's just completely not true. Even just through, and I'll, save that for another time, going into what, racism and all that actually is. But suffice it to say, at this point, it's absolute nonsense. You see, we're sitting here having a conversation, and I don't, think you want to call us nigga, and I don't feel like calling you a honky, and none of that, none of that nonsense. So
Wait,
I mean,
what is he white?
Oh.
Oh, hell no. I thought
Somebody
that
gonna
was your
take that
big
serious.
cousin or something. Just about a
He does look like a little bit of, I don't know, Puerto Rican or I don't know.
oh man.
Argentinian.
Yeah, y'all
Yeah,
both got red shirts on, so we thought y'all related.
Yeah.
my cousin Ryan.
Yeah,
I'll
there
be
you go.
the family reunion next week.
Right, right. Oh man. Well, with all that being said, if somebody sees this and it really resonates with them and they're wanting to bring this type of energy into their own community, how do they find information? Like, who can they reach out to? Like, is there anything that you can plug at the end of this to give people to go to?
Well, first, let me say this. I do want to give recognition to the collective that you're dealing with today as a Panther 48. Our objective and our primary goal is to deal with the continuity of the Black Panther. And so, with that being said, we dealt with the fact again, like I stated earlier, that there's been different in various formations of Black Panther across the United States, and there are dozens of different variations. So from that being said, our goal is to make sure that there is a core base of knowledge that people that want to be Black Panther and carry the legacy can go to without having to rebuild and feel as though they're doing this from scratch in terms of the leadership, the admin, the knowledge base of information that is needed for people to be trained and operate as a functional Panther. So there's a lot of history out there, but the problem is with the history is it just simply tells you who did what and when from a high level perspective. But now when you dig into the low, trench work and, hey, how does this department operate? How does that department operate? What specific departments, mechanisms, and structure that needs to go into place so that we can have a functioning chapter and body? That's where the Panther 48 comes in. That's where us three from that stance deal with the continuity of the Panther. And I would say from stating that, as far as especially here within San Diego and the West Coast, if people want to reach out to the Black Panther Party to get involved, regardless of branch of formation, I would say you just even go to the San Diego Original Black Panther Party for Community Empowerment, our Facebook page, and drop a dime, and then we will respond and route people, where we can within channels across the United States through that. So if you reach out to, and I'm the chief of staff here locally with the San Diego Black Panther Party, so you reach out to us on our Facebook page, we will put you in touch with whatever resources we can and help you get the ball rolling. So I think that's a good place to start. And there's always a wealth of information in terms of getting started and routing through the Panther affiliations. And so us three serve as a good component for that, because it's all about unity in the end, whether we talk about Black Panther Party or the community. So our goal is to keep that legacy going on the proper scale in terms of the leadership.
And what's the name of that group one more time for people to check out on Facebook?
The San Diego Black Panther Party, San Diego Original Black Panther Party for Community Empowerment.
Okay.
Lord. And so that, and just to, wars on the West Coast, Psyche in Texas, I'm in Florida. So just so folks don't think that it's strictly, okay, if I'm in San Diego, maybe I get in touch with them. They can also reach out to The Process, all one word, THEPROCESS, The Process, at panther48.com. In fact, if they want to reach out and get information, the phone number is 813-699-9871. And both of those avenues would go directly to the Panther 48. Again, emphasizing the idea of the umbrella. So if someone's in, somewhere, turned around Kentucky someplace, and they want to reach out to the party and get some information, they can use either one of those pathways to get to it.
And this probably should be added so it could be understood. This can be understood as Brother War and Brother E was just saying about the continuity. The Panther 48 is not an organization. It's not a splinter group or another Panther splinter group. The Panther 48 is a consulting group, so to speak, or a council that has taken all of the ideologies, the concepts, the organization factors, and basically developing them into a format, kind of like what companies can do if they needed to create structures in order to be more efficient. How they may reach out to some kind of consultant team to help them do that, streamline the organization. That's what the Panther 48 was developed for. And there is over decades of experience and learning that has went into creating the products that the Panther 48 has for the people, for an individual, for groups, whether they Panther formations or just revolutionary organizations that want to do some beneficial work in their community. So that's essentially what the Panther 48 is being developed for.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you guys for doing this. Before we end this thing, is there anything else that any of you wanted to share?
You're all right with me, Ryan. We gotta do this again, man.
Yeah.
White or not, you okay?
Well, yeah, we're definitely going to have to get into another one of these here in the future, you know, because I'm sure there's a lot of different directions that we can go. But I appreciate you guys walking through the history of everything.
Let me add one thing. I might as well plug this. I developed manhood training and teaching on my YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and look for Brother Psyche. Cool. Brother Psyche, BROTHERPSYCHE, and I do. You'll get a lot of manhood development, manhood training, things like that on that channel.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, that is it for this one today. Hope you all enjoyed it, and we are out of here.
Absolutely.
Peace.
Appreciate you, man.
All the people.
Wow.